Why yes, I am playing this brand new AAA title under Linux. Otherwise, using full Windows as a VM on my Linux machine? Yes, that's absolutely right. This is the first part of a 4-part series. I'm gonna try to release one video a week from this series. And they've also basically been shot. So over the next month, you should get about 4 videos here with the how-to and the step-by-steps. For the first part, we'll talk about the why. It won't be until the second part that we get to this killer machine behind me. I mean, this thing is awesome, but before you can do awesome, you gotta crawl before you can walk, you gotta walk before you can run. Yeah. Why Linux on the desktop? And this part's gonna be a bit vloggy, so you could probably skip it if you're not into that kind of thing. I'm gonna show you Linux on Windows, but what we're doing right here is Windows on Linux. So Linux is the host operating system. But if you just wanna get your feet wet, just start with it, it maybe doesn't make sense to give up everything and go head first into Linux, or at least I get that people have tried that maybe and it hasn't gone well for them. So let's try Linux on Windows first. Now, as an aside, if you use Mac OS and you're thinking, did you just assume my operating system? Well, I'll be providing a step-by-step guide for you as well. Don't worry, link is in the description. Now for the second video, we'll set up Linux on bare metal and talk about Wine for games and apps, and DXVK, which is a real-time translator for DirectX to Vulkan, which is really, honestly, pretty awesome. And you may have seen about that in another video. Welcome, if so. For the third part, we're gonna run a full Windows 10 virtual machine under Linux. You could dual boot that, meaning that the same installation of Windows will work on bare metal or as a virtual machine. And that's guaranteed compatibility with whatever it is that you might want to run. For part 4, A New Hope, let's call it, we will set up Looking Glass. And so Looking Glass is the software that lets you run your Windows applications in a window on your Linux desktop. So it's almost seamlessly, but not quite seamlessly in the same vernacular as I'm about to show you. But you could seamlessly move between your Windows desktop and your Linux applications with the same mouse and keyboard. It works pretty well. There are other solutions for that. There are other ways of doing that, but this works pretty well. And that's what I was doing when you came in. So each of these will have step-by-step guides in the wiki section of the Level 1 forums. Actually, if I'm thinking about it, those guides, they're actually already there. So you could get a head start if you want, because for part 2 and 3 and 4, we're just gonna go through those guides. There's a great guide on setting up Looking Glass on the Looking Glass website, so it works pretty well. But why Linux? And you're starting to sound like one of those insufferable Zealot people. I know, yes, thank you for letting me know. The response to literally any question with install Linux or RTFM. Yeah, I know, that's what I'm starting to sound like, but just those guys, I mean, that's not what I mean. Let me put it another way. Have you ever had a meal with ingredients that were grown in your own garden, or built or been given your own furniture or your house, or really owned anything that was made by an artisan? Not really something that was made for mass production, something that the artisan made for themselves, or something that the artisan made for the sake of making. Something made by somebody with great skill and care. Well, that's Linux and FreeBSD and a lot of other long-lived open source projects in general. And I mean, that's the artisanship. Linux is not 100% complete. It's not a complete ready-made piece of furniture. It's not a complete ready-made operating system. Well, it's getting close, but it depends on your definition of operating system. So, I mean, businesses, it's used all over the internet. I mean, it's complete enough for them, but it's not the year of the Linux desktop. So what's involved, what you experience when you do the last little bit of work for Linux on the desktop, the tiniest bit of sanding or polishing or compiling, you get that, I see you're a man of culture as well. reaction in fanboys, because they do that last little step and then they sort of experience that craftsmanship, that meal that was grown, from a local garden. It's like, oh, this just tastes delicious. This is amazing. For minimal effort, the minimal effort of that last step, they experience the payoff. Many, many years of that incredible craftsmanship and programming that went into Linux or whatever they're experiencing on Linux. And so that's why they have the reaction that they do. And yeah, me too, I guess. But for me, it's a lot more pedestrian. And the philosophy is very simple. Don't eat where you poop. I think that was Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu, right? Yeah. Or Lao Tzu, maybe it was Lao Tzu. Linux, even FreeBSD, that's a video for another day. Linux is a point where if you want, you can do everything that you need for work and play, and also simultaneously really give up very little. And not every aspect of it has that craftsmanship. There are bugs, but a lot of it does. And the part that you experience, you'll probably be really impressed with, I think, especially if you have any appreciation of what goes into computer software and that sort of stuff. So I think with Linux, you can transition slowly over time as you learn the tools, because Linux is a different experience than Windows or Mac OS. If you go and experiencing exactly the same experience, it's not gonna work. If you need to use Windows or Mac OS, you can keep running it. You can keep running it as a virtual machine once you're comfortable with Linux. Philosophically, I'll digress here for a second, the Qubes OS project, which is based on Linux, is that. The idea with Qubes is that you spin up these different virtual machines, which are, all these computers packed into containers with different purposes. You have one virtual machine for banking, and you have one virtual machine for goofing off and running, this kind of stuff, playing games on the internet maybe. And it provides a convenient user experience where all those different virtual machines executing those different contexts have different colored borders. So it's a good user experience and it's a good user interface for you to quickly move between those execution contexts. Your work browser that you're doing work in doesn't need to see that you're on, Facebook or playing Farmville or something, right? So it provides a level of security that a single operating system just can't provide. And this is just good computing hygiene, that sort of separation of concerns. And with Qubes, you do give up some things, like gaming on Qubes, not really a thing. I mean, you can play Farmville, but not AAA titles like I was playing. It's not really a thing yet. And even if you aren't ready for all that yet, or you're not ready to give that up or run multiple machines or whatever, you should be aware of it, at least the philosophy of it, I think. Because the why, the self-red pilling, if you will, there I go. So you just have to think of this as kind of a gray area. I run several VMs, not Qubes, because I want more functionality. And I recently did a video on Krypton, which is a way for you to have a secure enclave away from your day-to-day machine where you can store the really important stuff. Things like your Bitcoin wallet and your SSH keys and things like that. The technology like that in Krypton. Because hey, your friend could totally root your machine with a purpose-built game on Steam Greenlight, right? So I mean, everything's always, there's risk in everything. There's always some kind of relative concern. So generally, I would also say now that I think having a separate server where you store your important stuff and do your backups, and a server to clean up after you and a server to do errands for you is also part of a good lifetime of computing hygiene. That's the other thing that I think is good to have other than virtual machines, and sort of a separation of concerns. But that video on a home server is for another day, and we've actually done a lot of videos on that kind of thing. So if you really want to look that up, Level 1's got tons of videos on that. But anyway, thinking about this, for the VM setup in parts 3 and 4 of this series, there are still some performance trade-offs, but the performance really honestly is quite good. But enough of that. Let's set up Linux in the most undoable way possible, where you don't have to commit to anything. Basically, your existing machine, which I'm assuming is Windows or probably Mac OS, is ready to go. There are lots of ways you can run Linux under Windows. Check this out. Windows 10 even has a Linux subsystem for Windows. For this just gives you the command line on Linux. There's not really a way to run graphical programs on Linux yet, not easily, not cleanly. But if you're a web developer, for example, this is a really handy way of running all the cool stuff that you need to be into if you're a modern web developer. Things like Babel and Webpack and Node.js and Git and Python. You can do all of that literally from the Linux command line, because that's how half the universe is running all this anyway. Not even Mac OS. It's like, But again, no graphical programs. So this is probably not the best start for beginners to use the Windows subsystem for Linux because it's command line only. You can run any number of programs to host your VMs, thinking about virtual machines now. And those are typically called hypervisors. Microsoft has one that's built into Windows. Well, you have to install it. It's like you do the Windows subsystem for Linux. It's called Hyper-V. And it works just fine to run a Linux VM under Windows. But we're not going to use Hyper-V. We're going to run VirtualBox. VirtualBox is a piece of software that belongs to Oracle because they bought it. It used to be fully open source, but they bought it a while back, and Oracle, I don't really have a super high opinion of Oracle, but the reason we're using VirtualBox and not Hyper-V is for one reason. You can run it seamlessly. Now, what does seamless mean? Seamless is sometimes called rootless, or coherence, I think is what Parallels calls it on a Mac, if you're used to using Parallels on a Mac. That's when you have multiple different windows of programs on your computer, on your desktop, but each of those windows can be from a different operating system. This is the user experience that Qubes tries to give you, by the way. And this is really, I think, the best user experience for doing this kind of thing. Now, sadly, neither VirtualBox nor pay-for solutions like VMware Workstation offer a working and reliable, seamless experience for running Windows on Linux. VMware says not enough people are interested in that. Horsepucky, I say. There are at least thousands of us. I mean, there's thousands of you guys watching my videos, and some percentage of you guys are probably interested in seamlessly running Windows programs on Linux. VirtualBox used to do it. They dropped the support for it, say it's too hard to support, nobody wants it. Well, vote with your wallet, I guess, or let people know, or post in the comments if you want seamless work, VirtualBox Workstation. Maybe they'll bring it back, I don't know. So we're gonna start by installing VirtualBox. VirtualBox installation is pretty easy. Just go download VirtualBox and install it. We're setting up a virtual machine just in a second, but you gotta get the virtual machine software. If you get an error when you set up VirtualBox, then like a message or something like that saying that virtualization is not supported, you may have to check your computer's BIOS or UEFI and enable SVM is what the option is called on AMD systems, or VTX or VTD on Intel systems. Technically, VTD is for passing through a physical device for virtualization, but some BIOSes have tried to simplify, and they put both the VTX and the VTD option into one thing. So if you have VTD or VTX or both, just turn them on. It's fine. That's what you need in the UEFI. So if you do get that error, that's what you need to know to fix it. Anyway, so that's pretty much what we need to get started. Now, I have a Linux class on Udemy that will introduce you to the basics of the command line and the family tree of Linux and getting started with the command line and what's for beginners and all that. And it's really hard to go wrong with a distribution like Ubuntu or Linux Mint. For the setup that we're going to do here, we're not going to touch the command line mostly. So it's fine. You don't need that. I'm just throwing that out there. The next thing we're going to do is download Ubuntu, because it's the easy button solution. For this video, I'm using Ubuntu 18.04 LTS. The LTS means long-term support. That means the people behind Ubuntu are going to be updating this software until 2023, which is considered long-term. Non-LTS releases are typically updated for about a year, which means that the version number increments about once a year. So we're going to go from 18.4 to 18.10, and then 19.04, and then 19.10, and then 20.04 in probably 2020 or something like that. So if 18.10 or 19.04 are available at the time you're going through this video, use that. Should be fine. It's going to be newer software. It's totally okay. If you're not running a server or something that you need support and basically an unchanging environment until 2023, it's fine. If you have problems, complain on the Level 1 forums. We'll help sort it out. It's fine. That's not really a big deal. Once all that's done downloading this ISO for Ubuntu, we're going to create a virtual machine. And I'm going to recommend that you give your virtual machine at least 4 gigs of RAM or 8 gigs of RAM if your host has 16 gigs of RAM or more, if you're really going to do serious work inside your VM. If not, 2, 3, 4 gigs of RAM for the VM for just learning and poking around, totally fine. When you set up the disk, we're going to set up 40 gigabytes of disk space. This is going to create a file on your hard drive that represents the hard drive of that virtual machine. 40 gigs really honestly isn't very big. I mean, that's pretty big for a file, but it's not really very big in terms of like space to store stuff, but it's fine for testing. It's fine for you for doing whatever you want to do. You can always reinstall or copy your files later. Anything you do in the Linux machine, it's going to be in that file. So keep that in mind. Don't let it get lost or damaged. CPUs, I'm going to give it 2 CPUs. My host computer has 8 cores and can run 16 threads, so 2 CPUs seems like fine. I mean, I could give it up to 8 really without sweating, I think. We will need to download the ISO, we'll need to select the ISO we downloaded for the virtual machine. The virtual machine has a CD-ROM, and so the ISO acts like a physical CD that connects to the VM. So we don't have to like burn the ISO or mount it or copy it to a USB stick or anything like that. We can just tell VirtualBox, hey, we've got an ISO over here, and the VirtualBox says, cool, I'll pretend that's a CD to the virtual machine, and that's basically good to go as is. We're gonna go through the installer now, basically just set the options. Now the installer has 2 options for downloading non-free and software updates. I'm not gonna turn on either one of those. What do I mean by non-free software? Well, that's an important question. Software that is open source, but maybe patented, may not necessarily be freely distributable in all countries. So, for example, until very recently, MP3 files, audio files that were MP3 compressed, MP3 decoding algorithms were patented. And so it was questionable if you could distribute software for MP3 decoding because you couldn't decode an MP3 without using the patented mechanism, it supposed. So, things like that may not be free, truly free software. Drivers, firmware files, and other closed source software that a computer might need is also maybe not considered free software. And some people philosophically are against running any software like that because the software cannot be, said to guarantee the freedoms of the user. Suppose somebody writes a driver that spies on them or a TV that listens in on what you're doing. These are things that have been in the news lately. And so you can't audit it and say, oh, it's not listening to the user, it's not sending that information to a third party, and the aforementioned botnet and all that. It's really just a question of where you draw the line on that specific thinking. Generally, I would say that you can enable the non-free software and basically be okay. We're kind of pragmatic, so we proceed on and try not to get too preachy about these sorts of things. And there we are, fully set up. But we do want a seamless experience. We do want the seamless mode. To do that, we'll need to install guest editions. This is really just software that makes it easier and lower overhead to emulate video and I/O hardware inside this virtual machine. It helps to perform better, and it gives us, hopefully, our seamless experience, our seamless functionality inside the virtual machine, because it's not having to fully emulate a video card. It's basically able to just have a dummy video card that passes off commands for VirtualBox to the host OS. So theoretically, less overhead translates to everything that is faster. So we're gonna go to the menu option and we're gonna choose Installed Guest Editions. That'll mount an ISO that comes with VirtualBox, so it works just like our installer. And then we just run setup. And then once that's installed, ta-da, done. Now we can enter seamless mode from the menu. It's just that simple. Now from here, there is a lot you can do without touching the command line. You can install other programs, you can install other web browsers, you can install things like Google Chrome. If you're really into Google Chrome, you can have that. Firefox is installed by default. Generally, that's true of most Linux distributions. Chrome still may be a part of the botnet, so free software, all that, preachy, trying to just, things are happening. You can shut this software down when you aren't using it, and it'll free the RAM and other resources that your computer's using. Well, it won't free the 40 gig hard drive space, but you should know that. You can use it to get familiar with Linux, and you can do it seamlessly, which is pretty awesome. And you can do just about everything here that you would be able to do in Linux on the bare machine, the bare metal. Linux can be customized. Everything is modular. Like the graphical experience that you see here, it can be changed. This is GNOME. You can swap that out for another really popular desktop environment called KDE. Everything has been done at least 3 totally different ways by 3 totally independent people, so you can do a lot of exploring just from here. No risk, none at all. So if you mess something up, just reinstall. The challenge, though, is in understanding what and how you messed it up and fixing it. And that's one of those rewarding craftsmanship experiences, like I was mentioning at sort of the beginning of the video. Our community has been doing the Year of the Linux Desktop Challenge for a number of years now. So it's kind of lulled, right? The level 1 community at the level 1 forum. So if you're ever feeling down or frustrated, or you just want to huck your machine through the window because it's like, oh, I won't do what I want, I'm having a terrible problem, come and join us on the forums at level 1. Learn from the experience of those that took the plunge before you and the experiences that they have shared on the forum. Honestly, there's some really great stories there. There's some really funny stories. It's a lot of fun to read them and really just sort of hang out and do stuff. I'm Wendell, and at least until next week, I'm signing out. You can find me on the level 1 forums.